Okay, good morning everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Jeff Enlow. I'm the manager of LRS Web Solutions, a division of Levi, Ray & Schaup, a IT and software company headquartered in Central Illinois. Our group started back in 1996, and we're now a 20-person staff of graphic designers and web professionals who create custom web solutions for clients all over the U.S. We'd like to thank you for joining us as we discuss the topic of how to plan for your website redesign. The goal of this session is to give you an overview of a website design or redesign project so you can best prepare for one. I'm joined today by my esteemed colleague here at LRS, Tom McAllister. Tom is a senior account representative with our team. He's been with LRS for 16 years in a variety of roles, including web developer, business analyst, and project manager. Now he works with customers in a pre-sales and sales role as they determine the best solution for their needs. Before we get started, we want you to know that you are muted upon entry to this webinar to eliminate background noise, and this webinar will be recorded. You'll receive a link in a few days so that you can review this presentation again if you like. We plan to save some time at the end of this presentation to answer some of your questions. You can participate by submitting your questions in the chat box at any time throughout the webinar. You will be able to access the chat box by hovering your mouse at the top center of your screen and selecting the chat icon on the WebEx toolbar. We will review the questions during the webinar, and Tom will answer as many questions as time permits at the end. So let's get started. Tom, you approached us about having a webinar on this topic. So what makes this such a hot topic?
Thanks, Jeff, and good morning, everybody. I think there's a big opportunity for businesses and organizations to work closer with their web vendors, maybe their IT departments, or whoever's working on your website. And all too often, it's easy to work in silos, and I think we sense a lot of frustrations sometimes, particularly when maybe there's a marketing team that's working with an IT staff or that sort of situation. But, you know, a website design or a truly successful website design project requires communication and collaboration, obviously, but especially requires preparation. So my goal for this webinar is to give the listeners information about websites, web traffic, current web industry buzz, and relevant other topics so they can be better informed and hopefully feel more confident when we're finished. And ideally, the listeners today can walk away in a better position to collaborate with their web vendor or their IT department.
Sounds great. I know one of the questions I get a lot is why or when you should consider redesigning your site. And I know there are many reasons why you might want to consider redesigning your site, but everybody's situation is different. Are there some common reasons, Tom?
Yeah, and probably the biggest reason right now to consider upgrading to a new design is if your site is not yet mobile friendly. And I know there's always some confusion on that, so I'll explain a little bit about that. If you look into the use of mobile devices for browsing the web, it's increasing every day. It's blowing up, and you know, all the research and latest statistics that are coming out are really showing that we're right on the verge of mobile overtaking desktop use. But unfortunately, this is really overlooked by a lot of the companies that we talk to, and they don't really consider how their site may or may not work for their own users, customers, or even potential customers. So the big move right now is to have the mobile-ready site, obviously, and you'll often hear the term responsive web design. That's one that's thrown around a lot. And I really like the image on the current slide because it gives you a good overview of what a responsive design is. This is a single website design for this page, but it responds based on the layout of the device and the dimensions of the device. So on your screen, you can see the laptop and desktop monitor displays. They look pretty much identical. And the tablet's not too far off from those layouts, but you can start to see some of the icons there in the mid-page. It's really when you get to the smartphone that you see the difference. If you look at the horizontal menu on the three larger layouts, like desktop and laptop there, they're more of a horizontal navigation. So when a user on a smartphone views a site, the design layout changes, and those main navigation items are now stacked like buttons for easy tap navigation. You know, and that's what we're all coming to expect. So it's easy on the eyes, but it's also easy to navigate and easy to use, and that's what our customers need.
Well, and that's a very good example of the right way to do it. So I think what we should show our viewers today is a site that's not designed for mobile.
Yeah, agreed. I love this one.
Okay, so the example you see on your screen is from our fictional Bad Bank website, and it's a great example of what you do not want to do. By looking, you might say that it's okay because it shows up on the device. Unfortunately, it's not okay because it's clearly designed for desktop computers that is only scaling on the device. It's not easy to read or navigate, so it's not easy to use. You don't want your users to have to pinch and resize the screen in order to read the text or to use your navigation. If you want to learn more about this topic, you're actually in luck. We gave a webinar a few months ago about responsive mobile-ready web design, and you can find it on our website if you'd like to check that one out. Just go to our website, www.lrswebsolutions.com, and look under the Events tab.
And, hey, Jeff, before we leave the topic of mobile web design, I want to be sure we emphasize another important point, and that is that if your site is not yet mobile-friendly, it could be penalized in Google search engine rankings for searches that are done from mobile devices. So if I'm searching for a business like yours from my iPhone, and your site should be ranking well based on the content that you have, if it's not mobile ready, it's going to take some sort of a hit, a penalty, meaning that the ranking may go down a few. Google announced that last year, and there's more information about that available online. But everybody should think about that. You could be missing out on business, and with a substantial increase in web traffic from mobile devices, this has to be an important factor in how soon you redesign your site.
That's actually a great point. The mobile-friendly issue is almost reason alone to consider a redesign. But what are some of the other reasons to consider a redesign?
Well, three more common reasons I would say that we see frequently, and the first is if the site is difficult to maintain, and we have the conversation about what are your needs and what are your pains. Well, this is always could be a pain point for you. Does it take a lot of time to maintain your site? Do you need to call someone to make any and all updates to the site? If you're using a content management system, is it difficult to use? And we'll talk a little bit more about content management systems in a bit. But you should be able to maintain your site with some basic training and no technical expertise. If you're in a situation where you need to pick up the phone for all updates to your site, that's just not good. Secondly, the age of the site. And, really, a site has a lifespan of about 3 to 5 years, though a site can certainly work well past the 5-year mark. The important point here is that with the rapid changes in web technology, and by that I mean everything from web development tools that we use to web browsers that everybody browsing the web's using, after 3 to 5 years, a site might not be utilizing some of the latest and greatest. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a problem, but it might mean that there's a better way of doing things in the code than when your site was developed. In fact, if you think about 3 to 5 years ago, if your site was developed around that time, think about the web browsers we were using. Even last week, Microsoft came out and said that they were no longer going to support Internet Explorer 8, 9, or 10. And a lot of that's really the big push to get everybody over to Windows 10, of course. But, that's pretty substantial technology changes on the user side, especially if you're an Internet Explorer user. Thirdly, I'd say if the site is not meeting your goals or the needs of your users, and when we think of your users, let's keep in mind that they might be your customers or potential customers, but they could also be your staff if you have employees in remote locations who use the site or maybe secure areas of the site for their day-to-day operations. And if you're not hearing anything negative, that's probably a good sign, but it's really to your advantage to survey some of your users from time to time, even if it's a random sample, to get some feedback on what they like or dislike about your site. And the feedback might surprise you.
Well, those are all great points and probably have some of our listeners thinking seriously about a redesign. So let's get into the main reason we're all here today, which is how to plan for a redesign. Tom, could you go through the top ways our listeners can plan for a redesign project?
Yeah, that's why we're all here. So first, I firmly believe that it's important to start every web project by determining your project team. That's not your web vendor yet, but this is the team within your company or organization. And the size of your internal project team can vary depending on your organization. The amount of the people in the image on your screen right now is far from typical on web projects that we work on. But take note of the woman standing in the foreground because she represents something critical to the success. That's having a project champion, an owner, single point of contact, the person who can drive the project forward on your company's behalf. This individual should be the one who solicits feedback and input from most of the important stakeholders within your organization, and you want to do that early in the process. You want to use that input and the goals for your company or organization to identify everything that needs to be done on that new website. So it'll be critical that that single point of contact or a very select few individuals provide the feedback and site reviews to your vendor or your web provider throughout the project so that you avoid the dreaded too many cooks in the kitchen or design by committee that can cause a project to exceed time frame and budget. You can also get into a mess if multiple people from your staff are talking to your web vendor separately, because sometimes the message is not the same, and that can lead to confusion, which can lead to mistakes, which can also lead to budget and time frame increases, which nobody likes. So please remember this about the website manager champion role for your organization. They need to be in charge of not just the site, but every decision around it. Just because one of the people in the background shows up with content for the site doesn't necessarily mean it should go on there as is, or even that it should go on the site at all. This website manager needs to ask why it needs to be there. They need to be the gatekeeper for making sure only necessary content and content that's web ready makes it to the website. They need to have the right to protect the site. And otherwise, your website can become like that junk drawer in everybody's kitchen. And we've got a lot of different people here today. It's possible, I know some of you have large organizations, and you might be familiar with this, where over time, you try to appease everyone and keep them happy, and so a website can take on a lot more content than maybe it needs.
Well, Tom, you mentioned goals, and I guess the obvious goal is to get a new look for the site, but really our listeners should also come up with other real goals, and some of the more common goals I hear, we want to increase sales of our products, we want to increase web traffic, we want to add new functionality to meet the needs for a segment of our user base, to keep up with the competition, maybe their old site is old and not appealing, and finally, we need a site that's easier to maintain, and we hear that one a lot. Ideally, goals will be something you can measure later, but some of them can be subjective or perception goals.
Yeah, and along with the goals, it's good to document the likes and dislikes as well. And like I mentioned earlier with the whole design by committee thing, obviously you can't make everyone happy, especially if you have a lot of stakeholders, but it's good to document their feedback and then edit or filter it and finalize that information for your web vendor so that the final list of the likes and dislikes match the goals of the company and meets the needs of your users. And I guess a quick example of a few likes and dislikes, maybe you really don't like purple, absolutely no purple in the new design. That's a like or dislike. I really like the way photos are displayed on Pinterest, so we want our photo gallery to kind of resemble Pinterest. That's great feedback on a like or a preference during the design for us. So it's also a good time to discuss and document wants versus needs for your site, because there's likely some functionality that you need on the site, and that should be documented. But you also, if there's functionality or features you want but don't necessarily need, like maybe items that could be optional or considered in a later phase of the project, be sure that's indicated so the most important needs are met first and the wants can be addressed separately. I know if I'm working on a proposal, a lot of times I'll include everything that's a need in the proposal and have a separate optional section for things that could be part of the same budget and part of the same project, but might also be pushed off to phase two. You want to talk about all these things and finalize them before you meet with your web vendor. And we've been in meetings to discuss a website for company and listen to debates or arguments among the attendees from the companies. And while those are good debates to have, you want to have those before you start your meeting with your web vendor or salesperson at a web vendor, unless you need their guidance, because we're happy to do that as well. But definitely have those conversations in-house. Speaking of needs, it's also a great time to document any compliance requirements you have. I know we've got a few government representatives here today, 508 compliance, ADA compliance, anything that's specific for your organization. A lot of times your web vendor may already be familiar with those. It's great to document those so you can make sure those are part of the scope later, which we'll touch on.
So what other information would be best to discuss or decide on as an internal project team before getting your web vendor involved?
Next up, I'd probably say reviewing your competition. And our teams are going to look at customers' competitor sites a bit during the analysis and design phase when we get involved. But it's a good idea for our customers to be doing the same thing. And I suggest blocking out some time, sitting down at a desktop computer or laptop with a tablet and also your smartphone. And by using each of these devices and looking over the sites on each of them, you'll see how your competition is doing in reaching the mobile market as well as the desktop. See if they're how far ahead they are. And things that you can look for on your competitors' sites are what do they do well, and obviously what they don't do well. Do they clearly communicate what they do? Do they clearly communicate what sets them apart? What are their calls to action? Are they trying to drive people to phone, but maybe you're trying to either do the same thing or maybe you're trying to drive people to do something else, fill out a form or request a quote or something? Does your site does their site have a wow factor that you find really appealing? And what is it? If your site is not yet mobile friendly, are their sites mobile ready? You want to document your findings and rank your competitors in order of how they perform. And this is great information for you, and it's also absolutely great information for us as web vendors.
So how do search engine results factor into a review of the competition?
Well, search engine results play a huge role in all this analysis. And according to netmarketshare.com, as of December 2015, so just last month, the market share for search engines, and this probably won't surprise anybody, Google was on top with 66%, followed by Bing at 14%, and Yahoo following behind at 7%. So clearly Google is where you want to focus most of your search engine efforts, but don't forget about Bing and Yahoo. I recommend going to each of the key 3 search engines that we've talked about and running keyword searches for your business. Don't use your business name. Instead, use keywords and terms that your customers or potential customers would use in order to find a business or association like yours. And you want to run the searches on a variety of these keywords and write down the results. This is a great process to go through on a somewhat regular basis to see how things are going. And I know it can be somewhat confusing a bit with everything that Google has going on a page, so let's quickly break down the difference in how Google results are listed. So I've got a quick Google search here that we ran for bariatric surgery. It's a term that should pull up several local and regional medical facilities. And so you can see by looking real quick at this screen, we've got ads located all over, including the 3 at the top. The entire right side column is all ads that are paid ads. And you can see the labels there clearly. And then followed by a map in the middle. And the map is going to be determined if you have a Google Place and some other information. So we're not even really truly seeing results yet. It's only when we scroll down past those ads in the map that we get the first several what are called organic search results. And organic are the pages that are going to match based on the keyword search. So as you can see at the bottom of the screen, 2 of the closest medical facilities here for us that offer bariatric services are listed. But interesting, they're actually number 4 and number 5 after some major healthcare associations and, of course, Wikipedia. So 3 of the page 1 results were articles on WebMD. So WebMD's carrying a lot of weight. But for what it's worth, there were only 9 organic results on page 1. And the 2 I mentioned are the only local facilities, and so they're doing something right with their search engine optimization right there. So, but hopefully you now see how you want to search. It's these organic search results that you really want to take a look at. And a quick reminder here, you can run these same searches on desktop and mobile to see how the results vary, especially if your site is not yet mobile friendly, just to see if you are getting penalized in any way. And you can learn a lot from any of these searches also, like what keyword combinations finds your site most often or least often. And you can really determine how pleased or displeased you are with the results. And also if there are any surprises. And back to your competitors again, are they listed in any of those paid ads that you saw at the top or the side of the page? If so, and you're not involved, have you ever considered doing this? And that's something that we're not going to cover much more today, but definitely something we could talk about. I'd be happy to talk to anybody about that. And the time that your web vendor or web specialist uses to enhance or optimize your ranking for your site is search engine optimization, SEO. So most everybody is familiar with that term now, but just in case. So the key point from the slide here is that there are a lot of factors that go into your ranking. And it starts with having quality, concise, keyword-rich content on your site. But it's also having links to your site from relevant sites and having your site developed properly so it's SEO friendly, participating in social media when it makes sense for your business organization, and generally making the most of web sources outside of your site.
Well, a couple months ago, our Google certified individual on our staff, Andy Krug, gave a great webinar on the topic of Google Analytics. I know that's another big area of opportunity for businesses to learn about how their current site is performing. What would you say on that, Tom?
Yeah, that's very true and often overlooked. For years we were even including web stats for free when Google Analytics wasn't quite out yet, and a lot of our customers didn't look at it. It's just kind of forgotten. But hopefully you, our listeners today, review your analytics or site statistics from time to time, because these reports provide you with a lot of great information to learn about the behavior of your website visitors and what technology they might be using. There are several products on the market for tracking site analytics, and I just mentioned Google Analytics, and it's far and away the most commonly used. So let's spend just a few minutes here, and I'll show you some examples from that interface in case you're not familiar. So I've just got a very simple site here that I've pulled up. This is an audience overview, and we won't go into everything on this screen, but you can see if you look down toward the bottom of the page, that during a 1-month period, they had 67 users, 73 sessions. A session is when a user is on a site. So one or more of those users must have come back to the site for us to have fewer users and sessions. That's how that works. Also interesting on this page is usually the page views number and then pages per session. How many pages was a user looking at when they came to the site? So just a snapshot of that. There are so many things that we could show you in this. Now, the geographic page is kind of interesting. At a higher level of the United States here, and it actually started larger than this. We saw the world drill down to North America, got into the United States, and now we can drill down to any specific state that we want. And as you can see from the top of the list there at the bottom of the screen, Illinois is where most of the traffic was last month for this particular company, which is good because that's where they're based. So that would be logical. Now, analytics enable us to drill down even deeper to see what cities within Illinois were sending us the most traffic. And one of the features a lot of people like about Google Analytics is that you can view the data in the table layout, like you see there at the bottom, but it also includes a lot of charts and graphs, and you can even do a lot of customization. So if you're visual and you like that, you can do it that way. You can export reports, have them automated, even sent to your email. So let's jump over and take a look under the mobile menu, and instantly we get a snapshot of how many users came to the site using a desktop computer, smartphone, or tablet. You can see that there at the bottom. So your site might still have most of the traffic coming from desktop, but I recommend looking at the analytics over, say, the last year or so, looking at the months, because you might be able to see some trends. Because if you do have smartphone users coming to your site, but it's not mobile ready, they're truly getting a far from ideal experience when they visit the site. And finally, let's look at the pages listing within site content, because this is another fantastic report showing you the most popular pages, list by most viewed to least viewed. And if there's a page on your site that you expected to hear more about, particularly if it is a promotional or seasonal page, this is the report that's going to provide you the real data to back up the theory. And if a page is popular and you want it that way, great. But if a page didn't get much traffic and you want it to get more, maybe we need to do more things during the redesign phase, like maybe we need to change navigation. If a page got little or zero traffic over the last year, you might ask yourself why it's even on the site. Is it there for you or is it there for the user? Or it's always possible that the page is just not easy to find. Back to my navigation explanation. So you get the idea. There's a lot of information found in the site statistics and Google Analytics, and you really don't need to be an expert to get some great high-level information. You can just kind of peruse through here and see a lot of things. So, and we do like to review our customers' analytic reports prior to a redesign because it gives us a lot of great info. But it's beneficial to both us and our customers when we're both looking at those. So don't forget what Jeff said about us having a webinar online about this topic already. And again, web address lrswebsolutions.com. If you look under the events link, and over on the right is where we have the archive of all of our previous webinars.
All right, well, jumping away from the topics of search engines and analytics, another area that seems to be getting a lot more attention on the web over recent years is content. For a long time, the saying was content is king, and that was usually because how important the text content was to determining search engine rankings. Now, that's changed a bit over the past few years, so Can you explain more on that, Tom?
Yeah, sure. You're right. For the longest time, so much of the focus was on making sure that the content was keyword rich, so it contained keywords that your users might be using when they were on a search engine looking for a business like yours. And while some of that's still true, you don't want to overdo it with keywords. A common term here is keyword stuffing. The new common sense move is simply writing effective text content for the target audience and keeping it as brief as possible. And the two reasons that this is important are that people don't want to search your site or read through a ton of text just to find the information or answers that they need. And more people are on mobile devices. We've been talking about that. So there's less room to display the content on the device. The key is to review your content and trim the fat, making sure the points are made without being overly wordy. Unlike when we were writing essays in school that needed to have a minimum number of words, the web should be effective but brief. And even your styling of your content, little things like adding bulleted lists rather than having long lists of words that are separated by commas in a paragraph, is a great move to make the text more readable on the web.
And web readers really are skimmers, so keeping it concise does make sense. And it doesn't require anyone to be a professional writer to review the existing content to trim it down.
True. And one more point that should be made about the content that's related to the project is you want the content ready as early in the project as possible, ideally even before the design begins. Because if you think about it, we're designing the navigation. So if we're adding a lot of pages or an entire new section, that can really make a big impact. So late last-minute content changes can sometimes be a curveball for the project. So everybody just kind of keep that in mind. And, sticking with the content topic, let's touch about content management systems for just a minute here. A content management system, commonly referred to as CMS, is an easy-to-use, web-based method of maintaining your site. It allows you to easily maintain the content. If you add a new page, you can control how it appears in the menu. If you need to edit a page, it's a piece of cake. And some CMS systems even allow you to have workflow in place. So some of your staff can maybe edit or write the content, but it goes into a pending status until someone, maybe a website champion role or the manager, can review and approve the updates to take the site live or those new changes live on the public site. And this is also the same web-based interface that you use to update blog posts, news stories, photo galleries, events, things like that. So the key to remember is that it's all web-based. So you can update your site from anywhere as long as you have access to a connected computer. That's a huge step for enabling you and your staff to run your site after it launches without really having to install some specific software system on your computer. And there are many, many content management systems on the market. If you don't have a preference of your own, it's likely your web vendor that's going to include one in their proposal, and they can demo how it works or tell you more about it. If your internal IT staff will be developing functionality for this website later, or if they're going to maintain your site in-house after it launches, they may have a preference, or at very least they want to have a chance to review the CMS that's being proposed prior to agreeing to the project. There's a couple of different languages, programming languages, platforms that are very common out there. They can make a big impact on whether your staff's even going to be able to work on it afterwards. So, and also just be aware that some CMS systems are free, while others typically have an annual license fee. So there are definitely pros and cons to both, and you just want to kind of go through all that with your web vendor.
Okay, so at this point, the company has gathered and documented a lot of information that will be helpful to their web vendor. But I know you like to use the term web partner, correct?
Yeah, and I just got done saying web vendor, and absolutely right. Like when you buy a car, you're going to need to get service over time, and your website is similar, and then it will require some ongoing website maintenance or updates from time to time. And you're likely going to be hosting the website with them if you're not going to host it in-house. You might be adding more functionality or making changes to the site over the next few years. So after the site launches, you'll also even need to collaborate and review your analytics like we've been talking, or keyword searches, and see if maybe some search engine optimization needs to be performed. So based on this, you need to select the right web partner who you feel most comfortable to get your site up and running, but also be there for you in the future. You really want to think long-term. And finding a team that you like is critical, and here are a few factors to consider when selecting your web vendor. Experience is an obvious one. And the thing there is really, is the company experienced in web technology? And I say that because there are some marketing firms out there that do a lot of marketing, so that might be the biggest impact for your business. But how much do they do on the true web and technical side? Because, in fact, like in our case, a lot of times we'll partner with marketing firms who might need us to do the web design and web development because that's our specialty, but marketing is theirs. So find out what the expertise and experience is for your company. The portfolio is obviously something you can look at on their website, and you might ask their reps for additional links to other work. The size of the staff could be important, not just for the experience or size that they have, but also resource availability. Like, for example, what happens if they have a lot of turnover? Do they do subcontracting, or do they do work all by themselves with their team? The stability, because there are many, many web agencies out there. Seems like there's one popping up every day. How long have they been around? How secure do you feel that this new partner will be there for years to come? Another big one, customer service. We talked just before about after the site launches. Are there multiple methods for getting assistance from your agency after the site launches? What are those methods? And do those methods work for you? Or do you prefer to handle things differently? What is their process or project timeline and process like? You want to have them describe it, so at least you know what to expect. Are there project milestones? When do you get to review progress through the site project? When are you provided status updates or communication from your project manager? Another one that's becoming less and less of an issue or concern, but location, that may be important to you. But anymore, with all the web and communication tools that we have, from WebEx like we're using today, video conferencing, email, Basecamp, there's so many things out there that, if the web vendor you're interviewing is not local, you can ask how the interaction or communication takes place during the project. And once you've selected a web vendor and made everything official with signed contracts, they will likely assign their own project team to your redesign. And that team's usually led by a project manager who will serve as your main point of contact. And your team there may consist of analysts, web application developers, front-end developers, graphic designers, content writers, search engine specialists, and maybe even user experience engineers. It's the availability of those resources that usually determines how soon your project gets started. And that team will review your information that you've provided. We've talked about a lot of that today. That's going to be very helpful for them. They'll do some additional research, and then they'll start working on your site.
Yeah, and I mean, in a lot of ways, designing a website is a lot like building a house. You provide your input on likes and dislikes, sizes, styles, colors, and so on. You might start with sketches or concepts that lead to a blueprint. The layout and measurements are finalized, and then construction can begin.
Right. And on the website side of the comparison, your web project team will start with all of the information provided and collected, and then they'll begin applying that to the website planning phase in areas that we refer to as information architecture, navigation, and the sitemap. And the image on this slide is great because it's a glance into a side of web planning that maybe you haven't seen. The project managers, the analysts, designers, they all get together and account for everything that needs to be in the new site, from pages, images, links to functionality modules, different links to outside resources. And we need to know what are our goals or calls to action, what are the best ways to drive those users to the pages that we want them to see, and all of that occurs in the planning and designing phases.
Very good. Well, let's talk about design for a couple of minutes. I manage our team here at LRS Web Solutions now, but prior to that, I was one of our graphic designers. And I do have some recommendations for our listeners about web design. If you give your design team enough information up front, you're going to get a website that's in the ballpark of what you're after. The key is trust your designer. If you were a web designer, you would have designed it yourself, but you're probably not, and you just hired a professional to create this site for you. So I encourage you to listen to your designer's rationale for the design and trust that the decisions that they have made are in your best interest. There is far, far more that goes into a custom design than you might think. From grids to font and color selections and more, it's a craft that can be oversimplified and really undervalued. When you see your new design mock-up for the first time, we recommend you review it and take a few days to really let it sink in before you provide feedback. Also, if you take the design to 20 other people, you're going to get 20 opinions because you asked for them. Think back to your goals for the project. If you defined them with your internal staff and you provided all that necessary information and input to your designer, then the design really should meet those goals. And as difficult as it can be sometimes, remember that the site is here to serve your users. Before you decide if the design makes you feel a certain way, ask the objective questions. Does it meet the needs of our users? Will they like it? Will they find it useful? Does it meet your goals? So here's another common question I bet you guys get, Tom. How long do website redesign projects take?
Oh, yeah, we get that one frequently. And I hate to say it depends, but it depends. Everything from the size of the site, so obviously a smaller brochure site with a few pages is much easier than a large multilingual corporate site with lots of functionality, potentially even multiple sites. All of that impacts the time frame. Planning makes a big difference, which is a big reason we're having this webinar today to help everybody, because the more information we have up front helps us estimate better, helps us get off the ground faster, all those things. The design, like how much custom design is involved, can make an impact. The amount of features or customization. So plug and play functionality sort of thing is a lot easier than if your web partner is developing some custom interface for you. And don't forget that a lot of that functionality involves programming and databases, so it can be kind of complex. Earlier I mentioned availability. Resources can make an impact. Content is another really big one, and I stressed earlier about how important it is to have the content finalized before the site project begins. We get into a lot of projects where we're waiting on content to launch the site, somewhere in the middle. So the more we've got up front, the better. I'd say a typical web project is somewhere between 3 and 5 months, but that's really optimistic. And again, there are many factors in how long a project will take. The 3 key takeaways, I guess, for time of a project would be to start talking to your web vendors during your planning stages, because they can help you narrow down your needs. And if you have a required launch date, give your web partner plenty of notice and communicate that up front. And you can help your time frame by being as prepared as possible up front, like I've talked about there. So as we near the end of the webinar, prior to taking questions, let's say a few words about proposals also and what to look for, because I know that's a big topic. You need to make sure that you're truly comparing apples to apples. That's this beautiful slide. So first, you might get a proposal that's either fixed price, which is some single amount for the website, or it might be like we present, which is an estimated range of hours and therefore an estimated cost. And there are pros and cons to each option for you, and it's really up to you on which format you prefer. The point that I'll stress here is just make sure you understand and everything's documented in what you're getting. And what you are getting in a website project is usually referred to as scope. And it's usually in the proposal, and it also should make its way to the contract. So you want to compare both of those things and make sure that everything that you said that you were going to do is in there. Because the scope is really what your web partner is agreeing to do for that price. And your proposal should provide a very detailed scope of the project. Speaking of scope, another important consideration when reviewing proposals is design. Jeff talked about design. One big thing to know is if your web vendor is creating a custom design for you where they're starting from scratch, or if they're giving you a pre-designed purchased template from an online store, because there are lots of online templates that can be purchased that are out there. Another thing, are all the pages going to have the same layout and design, or will there be multiple page designs? So, for example, most of the work that we do is custom design. We will always do a custom design of a home page. We will do a custom design of a content page. And though all the other pages will likely use that content page layout and design. It's possible that we may, based on the content or the goals of the site, we may design multiple pages and layouts. But it's important, again, what am I getting? If you're going to design something custom, how many custom page designs are there? And very similarly, I guess, with the templates designs, same kind of deal. How many page layouts are you going to get? You also want to look at the prices. If you have a group of proposals that differ greatly in price, you definitely want to look closely at the details so you can accurately assess and compare them beyond the price. If there's a big difference between the pricing proposals, why is that? And if something in your proposal does not make sense, ask that account representative. And I know here at LRS, my colleague Katie Hahn, she and I would much rather spend more time up front making sure that you understand the proposal, what you're getting, than having confusion and potential frustration and or costs later. And remember that your web vendor should be your partner. So you need to feel comfortable enough in the pre-sales and proposal stage to have these sorts of conversations before you ever sign a contract.
Well, Tom, that's great information. So I think before we move on to any questions, let's recap some of today's top takeaways, and then we'll get to those questions. So top takeaways: your website should be mobile friendly. Determine your project team and team lead. Define your goals, likes, dislikes, needs, and wants. Do your research. That includes competition, keywords, analytics, all the things that Tom reviewed. Review your content and adjust as necessary. Review the proposals closely, as Tom just talked about. Take time to select the right web vendor, or as we like to say, web partner. And then remember, web projects take time, so plan accordingly. So I want to take a few questions from our listeners. I'm reading through these, and we're going to pass them on to Tom. If you have a question, you still have a little time to submit. Remember, you can submit those by using the chat box. You can access that chat box by hovering your mouse at the top center of your screen and selecting the chat icon on the WebEx toolbar. So let's read through the ones that already came in. So what if we like the design of our site, but it's not mobile? Do we have to redesign it or rebuild it? Tom, can you speak to that?
Yeah, sure. That's a common question there because maybe the site was, well, it doesn't really matter how long ago the site was designed. You still might really like the way it looks, and obviously your customers and users are familiar with it. So usually what we'll do is try to just take all that into consideration and review the current design. Most likely we're going to have to make some modifications to the design, but not necessarily like blow it up and start over. We could just make different modifications so that the layout for desktop would also then function properly and respond like we saw with the responsive design, so that the content can stack itself like we saw on that smartphone. And so sometimes we'll get into a desktop layout that may or may not really do that well, and that's when we maybe have to have a conversation about this is not so great. Maybe we can stick with your same color scheme. We might be able to bring in certain elements from the current design, but the layout of the home page might need to change a little bit more than, say, a minor tweak.
Okay, we've got another question. A listener asks, what are some of the biggest mistakes you have seen clients make during web projects?
I think with that one there, I touched on a few of them earlier, and that's when we get content late in the project, even like huge content changes. We're going to add 3 more sections. If you can imagine with a website design that we finalized and we're using a horizontal navigation bar, we're going to utilize that as best as we can. And if you want two more top-level navigation items to go into that site, but we've already filled that horizontal space, that becomes a real challenge to figure out how that's going to happen. So again, that kind of emphasizes my point from earlier about how important it is that we get that information early. So kind of winging it, I guess, on the content side is a big mistake. Another one, I guess, just personal opinion, is that I think that I'll use the word compromise. I think that clients sometimes can compromise, and and some of that might be justified for a variety of reasons, whether it be cost or whatever the case may be. But again, if you can get a website project together and a site launches and it's going to last you 5+ years, that's a really good investment. And there are some times when I think that maybe there's a compromise in not moving forward with what could be maybe the better approach at the time of the site launching, or the site being redesigned, because it can be more complicated to do certain things to a site later. So it's good to pull the trigger early on the different work and get in and do as much of it as you can when you launch. I mentioned a phase 2, and those things are certainly possible. I guess it's really best to just make sure that you're talking about all those things early. Because, again, if you're selecting, say, us for your web vendor, if we know that in a phase 2 or phase 3 you're wanting to do a few other things, it's going to help us as we design during phase 1. So I'd say that's probably the big one. It might be. Hopefully that answers the question.
Okay. Well,
by the way, if anybody has questions afterwards, I know we're going to throw up the slide with contact information. But if anybody has thinks of a question later or something that doesn't really get directly addressed today, definitely happy to answer any questions later.
That's a very good point, and we've got time for just a couple more. We've got a couple of questions from listeners that are more specific to content management systems that you talked about earlier. One listener asked which we recommended, Drupal, WordPress, or Joomla, and as Tom mentioned, the big PHP sites that differ from the .NET programming language. Honestly, we are more of a Microsoft shop. We develop more specifically in .NET. We do have a little WordPress experience. But I would say of those three, and you'll hear a lot about those, WordPress, Drupal, and Joomla, WordPress is probably the most mature of the three. And when I say that, if you go out and search in the community for what's been developed in the way of modules and templates and things like that, I think you're going to find that WordPress is more ubiquitous. It has a much more developed and mature community. And, if you see the charts on usage, WordPress is definitely blowing away the other two. So that would probably be my recommendation. And again, we're not WordPress experts. We are more in the .NET space, but hopefully I can, that addresses those two questions. And one more I'd like you to speak to, Tom. Somebody wrote in, and let me hopefully I word this correctly. Someone asked, who is the best at writing content for the site? And I guess by that they mean, are you, since you know your audience, or should you hire a professional writer?
That's a good question, and it is challenging because I know a lot of people are not comfortable writing the content for your site, and it's definitely not one of those easy things to do if you don't normally write. I think if you look at a lot of the latest discussions online, because web content is such a huge popular topic surrounding the web right now, everybody's encouraging businesses to look at the people like your subject matter experts within your organization and at least have them involved in their areas so that everything is accurate. Obviously, you want it accurate. And they can help. And if they're not great writers, you at least want to get maybe someone involved who can help in that area. Because another target for your content is that it has a single voice, is what we're trying to say, so that things sound like they're not written by 20 different people, but sound like they are really coming from the same source. So if you can have somebody that does a little bit of the filtering or the editing or something like that on your staff, that's great. You can always turn to, if you're working with a marketing agency, they likely have a writer. If you're working with a web partner, they may have a creative writer on their staff or someone who can do some editing. We certainly, from time to time, will do a little bit of copy editing. And we will do a little bit of writing, but our experience, I would say, is best when the customer with the subject matter expert has conveyed everything that they're trying to get across, and then we can kind of help to narrow that down a little bit. So it might be a collaboration, again, on your own internal staff, and then, if necessary, with your web partner or somebody on the outside.
That's great. Well, thanks, Tom. Thanks for that information today. And that's really all the time we have for questions. Thanks to everyone for attending today's webinar. I hope you found it to be helpful and informative. And, if we didn't have time to get to your questions, as Tom said, please feel free to follow up with us after the webinar is over. And what a great segue. Here is some contact information for you. If you're not yet working with a web vendor or looking for a new one, or even if you just have additional questions about the topic of redesigning your site, I hope you'll consider contacting us here at LRS Web Solutions. There's obviously no obligation when you talk to us, and we'll be happy to review your situation, and we'll give you the best advice that we can based on our experience. You can reach Tom or his colleague, Katie Hahn, using the contact information listed here on the screen. I just want to say thanks again to Tom for all the great information, and thank you to all of you for joining us today, and please enjoy your afternoon.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.